Hello and welcome to Life Admin 365 and welcome to today's video. Today I'm sharing with you my go-to recipes for homemade Ladi Pav and burger buns. As I move along the video, I'll share a few but key tips to keep in mind when you bake any kind of bread. Let's begin with Ladi Pav or dinner roll. This recipe is a double recipe and yields 18 dinner rolls. To 2 cups of lukewarm milk, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of sugar followed by 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour or maida, whisking the two well to dissolve the sugar. Then adding in 4 teaspoons of active yeast and whisking it thoroughly. Setting this mixture aside in a draft-free area for the yeast to proof. This will take about 10 to 15 minutes depending on how warm the surrounding is. Here is my tip number 1. When you're proofing, make sure the milk is lukewarm. That is, when you dip the tip of your little finger in the milk, it feels warm to touch and not hot or cold. If it's cold, yeast will not proof. And if it's hot, the yeast will die. Also make sure you use instant or active dry yeast that hasn't expired. So while the yeast is proofing, let's make sure the other ingredients are ready to go. Starting with measuring out flour. Since this recipe is a double recipe, all measurements are doubled. Cut the recipe in half for single batch. Measure out 4 cups of all-purpose flour or maida. Here comes tip number 2. It's best to weigh out the ingredients, especially flour, but if you don't have weighing scale, then measure the flour correctly by transferring flour from the container to the measuring cup with another cup or spoon and gently level it out. Don't jam-pack the measuring cup with flour. Next, I'm adding half a cup of milk powder. In my opinion, this is the secret ingredient that makes the fluffiest pav. Then goes in 2 teaspoons of salt. Sift the flour in the mixing bowl of your stand mixer. This step is optional but recommended because it's the best way to get rid of the tiny lumps that flour can have. Looks like yeast has proofed perfectly. Proofed yeast is poofy and is called the dough sponge. Time to stir things up. Add proofed yeast to the sifted flour and start kneading on low-medium speed. I like to use KitchenAid stand mixer for kneading dough, but if you don't have a stand mixer, no worries. Just knead the dough on the counter for good 10 to 12 minutes. Back to the dough kneading in the mixer. Look how liquidy the dough is, almost like batter, but trust me, low mixing speed will turn it into the dough, albeit a bit sticky. Knead on low to medium-low speed for about 8 to 10 minutes and every 3 to 4 minutes turn off the mixer for 30 seconds so that it doesn't get tripped. Scrape along the sides to ensure that everything gets mixed well. Get the dough out of the mixer bowl and onto the counter. Dust your working surface with a little bit of flour and transfer the sticky dough. Even at this stage, the dough is still loose and floppy. Sprinkle a little bit of flour over the dough and tuck the edges of the dough underneath and roll the dough between your hands for about 3 to 4 minutes or until nice smooth dough comes together. Place the dough with its edges tucked underneath in a well-oiled bowl and cover the dough bowl with plastic wrap and cover with a kitchen towel. Keep the dough for its first rise for about 60 to 90 minutes in a warm, draft-free area. After the dough has doubled up, it's time to shape it into buns. And look at this beauty. I just could not stop myself from punching it just for the effect purpose. The next step is completely optional, but I prefer to do it because that's the only way to get uniform pav. So what I do is weigh out the dough and then divide it by the number of pavs that I want. Because this is a double batch, I'm first splitting the dough in 2 equal portions and then each portion of the dough I'm dividing it in 9 equal portions. Once the pieces are ready, it's time to get them shaped into smooth buns. So this is how you do it. Take a piece of dough, tuck its edges and ends inside, pushing it up to form a round ball. There is a reason I prepared a double batch. I'm using half of the pavs for today's dinner and the other half I'm going to freeze it for later use. Yes, these prepared buns are very freezer friendly. So while one half of the pav are on their second rise, the other half are going in the freezer. I'm placing them in single layer on a plate or on a tray and flash freezing them for about 30 to 45 minutes. While fresh buns have about 30 more minutes to rise, I'm taking out the second batch of the buns from the freezer in a freezer safe container until ready to use. These buns will stay good for at least 6 to 8 weeks. I haven't tested beyond this time frame because I end up making a lot of pav bhaji or misal pav and they get used up. What can I say? These pav are so good. Once fresh pav have had their second rise, I'll bake them in a preheated oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 16 to 17 minutes. And I'll use the same temperature for baking the frozen buns as well. But there is an additional step that needs to be done before baking the frozen pavs. About 3.5 hours or 4 hours before you're ready to bake, take out the buns from the freezer. Thoroughly brush oil on all sides of the baking pan or dish and place the frozen buns in them. Loosely cover the baking dish with plastic wrap and keep it in a warm, draft-free area. Also cover the baking dish with a towel to keep it warm. A note here, thaw time may vary depending on how warm or cool your surrounding space is. After about 2 to 3 hours, remove the plastic wrap and let it rise for another hour or so. If you want, you can also apply melted butter over the buns and then keep them for their second rise, or you can apply it just before placing them in the oven. So after about 60 to 90 minutes of second rise, this is how the fully risen bread will look like. When the buns have risen well or have doubled in size, place them in a 400 Fahrenheit preheated oven for 16 minutes. Here comes my tip number 3. Before baking, make sure the oven is preheated to the baking temperature. Baking with a cool oven will not result in a well-risen soft pav. Once 16 minutes are up, turn off the oven and bring out the pan and let the pav cool completely before removing them out from the pan. And lo and behold, look how beautiful they have turned up. Soft and spongy. I was having a hard time not eating them. As soon as I took pictures and recorded whatever I needed to record, I simply smeared salted butter, Amul is my favorite, and just ate it. So delicious. Yum yum. Moving on to the second recipe, which is the burger bun recipe. I don't make these often, but whenever I make them, I feel that it's time well spent. I'm starting with measuring out 1 pound or 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour. I would strongly recommend to weigh flour instead of measuring out before making any kind of bread. But if you're going to measure out using cups, then measure out the flour by transferring flour from the container to the measuring cup with another cup or spoon and gently level it out. Don't jam-pack the measuring cup with flour. Reserving half a cup of this weighed out flour and keeping it handy. Also keeping lukewarm water ready on the side. Lukewarm water is the water which is at around 105 degrees Fahrenheit, or when you dip the little finger in it, feels warm to touch and not hot or cold. To the mixing bowl of the stand mixer, I'm adding 1 package of active dry yeast and the reserved half a cup of all-purpose flour. Giving a quick whisk and adding lukewarm water. Mixing well and letting it sit aside for 10 to 15 minutes or until the mixture becomes foamy. Now that this mixture is foamy and slightly risen, it's time to add the other ingredients. In goes 3 tablespoons of melted butter followed by 1 large egg. Whisk the egg before adding it to the foamy mixture. Then adding in 3 tablespoons of white sugar followed by 1¼ teaspoon of salt. Giving everything a quick stir and then adding in weighed out flour. Attaching the dough hook to the stand mixer and starting to knead at low speed for about 6 to 7 minutes, stopping every couple minutes to rest the mixer. About 5 minutes into mixing, the dough becomes a sticky ball. Continuing to knead it for another minute or 2 until the ball becomes free from the sides of the mixing bowl. Dusting the working surface with all-purpose flour and transferring the loose dough from the mixer bowl onto the dusting surface. Gently rolling the dough between my hands to form it into a smooth ball. Oiling a large bowl and transferring this smooth ball into it. Oiling the top surface of the ball as well, covering it with plastic wrap and keeping it in a draft-free area for 90 minutes to 2 hours depending on how warm or cool your area is. Looks like it has doubled and is spilling from the sides, which means I could have used an even larger bowl for rising. Anyways, removing the plastic wrap and lightly punching the dough and getting it out of the bowl. Since I like my burger buns to be uniform, I'm weighing out the dough to get the total weight and then dividing it by 8 to get the weight of each dough piece. But you don't have to do this. You can roughly divide the dough into 8 as equal portions as possible. Turning each piece of dough into round shape by gently rolling it on the working surface with the heel of my palm. Picking it up and tucking the ends to form a smooth ball. Lightly dusting flour to keep the dough from sticking and placing the formed smooth ball on a parchment paper lined or a silicone sheet lined baking sheet. Repeating the process for the remaining dough portions and staggering them on the baking pan about an inch apart. Gently patting each bun with my hand and flattening it to get about a half an inch thick disc. Lightly sprinkling each bun with all-purpose flour and very gently spreading it around. Covering the buns with another baking pan of the same size instead of a plastic wrap to avoid the buns from flattening out once they rise. Covering with a kitchen towel and keeping it for rising in a draft-free area for about an hour or until the buns have doubled in size. Unwrapping the baking sheet. Oh my god, look at these. How beautifully the buns have doubled up. Then gently brushing each bun with the egg wash mixture. Egg wash is nothing but whisking 1 egg and 1 tablespoon of whole milk, then sprinkling each bun with sesame seeds. This is an optional step and you can skip it if you don't fancy the seeds. Placing the buns in 375 Fahrenheit preheated oven and baking for about 15 minutes. Once the time is up, removing the buns from the oven and letting them cool for about 20 to 30 minutes or until they are cool to handle. And that's it, the buns are ready to eat. Just make sure you use a serrated knife to cut the buns in half so that you get the clean cuts and you don't have a lot of crumbs on hand. And boy, look at the insides thoroughly and perfectly from both outside and the inside. Beautiful, nice airy pockets, so soft to touch. Hardest part and the most difficult part in this entire prep is waiting for the buns to cool down once they come out of the oven. As soon as they're cool enough to handle, I smother them with salted butter, once again Amul, and just dig in. It's so good. It just reminds me of bun maska that I used to eat growing up in India. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed both the recipes and will definitely give it a try whenever you have some time on your hand, or if you just want to try something new. If you haven't already subscribed, do subscribe to my channel for more meal planning, meal prepping and recipe videos and home organization and a day in my life video. See you all in the next one.